I am Ishika Singhal, Vice President of Peace Club, and I will be your host today along with Khushi Nigam, who is our General Secretary.
আমি বলে দিয়েছি ওকে লেবু বসতে আমার ডাক্তার
all,
ওষুধ দিলে ওষুধ আনতে যাবে
all audience members are requested to switch on their mics if possible and keep themselves on mute unless asked to avoid disturbance. As the event is being recorded, the link for certificates of participation will be shared in the end. Eleanor Roosevelt said that it isn't enough to talk about peace, one must believe in it, and it isn't enough to believe in it, one must work at it. Peace is when people are able to resolve their conflicts without violence and can work together to improve the quality of their lives. Historically understood as being the mere absence of war, peace in today's world is understood in a far greater sense. And it is in this spirit that the Peace Club was established by students of Kirori Mal College to raise awareness and disseminate ideas of peace, harmony, and happiness to resolve conflict and crisis that continue to plague our civilizations. We strive to make the potent voices heard by building bridges between diverse sets of people and establishing a dialogue and an understanding between students, communities, and professionals, all in order to achieve a comprehensive society along the values of mutual respect, inclusiveness, equality, acceptance, and solidarity. Now I will request Dr. Vandana Chaudhary, who is our staff advisor, to welcome our guest and elaborate on the history of the Peace Club.
Thank you very much. Honorable guest, Dr. Sweta Chaman Saxena and Captain Vijay Srinivas, respected Principal Dr. Vijay Chauhan, faculty members from various departments, my dear friends from Education Division of Bharat Sokagatkai, and my young friends and students, warm good evening to all of you. In April 2019, with the encouragement and support of our principal, Dr. Vijay Chauhan, we formed the Peace Club in Kirori Mal College. With the onset of the pandemic, our activities transformed with physical distancing, and we all struggled to survive with the pains of losing loved ones in every family. With the freshmen and sophomore joining college digitally and not yet seeing college in real space, we decided to revive the activities of the Peace Club online and connect digitally. We are celebrating today and tomorrow International Day of Peace. And before I hand over to Khushi Nigam, General Secretary of the Peace Club and our coordinator for today's event, I want to say once more on behalf of the Peace Club, welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you here on a working day. Thank you very much for taking time out to join us.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your kind words. Mind is everything. What you think, you become. Gautam Buddha. Where there is love, there is peace, a famous Middle Eastern saying. May the spirit of peace gently enfold you in its wings and bring healing to your heart, a Native American proverb. As you can see, since the dawn of mankind, human beings across nations, cultures, and times have strived for an ultimate cause, that of peace. 40 years ago, on this very day, the world decided that amongst its various political, military, and social crises, we must commemorate this innate desire for love, fraternity, and kindness. Thus, each year, the 21st of September marks the International Day of Peace, the roots of which trace to the United Nations General Assembly. This day is a cause for celebration of peace in all its dimensions and manifestations, be it non-violence, ahimsa, sustainability, kindness, nirvana, amongst others. In this context, our club has organized a two-day event called PAX GAIA'. PAX is a political term meaning peace, and it is often accompanied with great nations across time. Pax Romana for ancient Rome, Pax Americana for United States, and Pax Indica for our beloved India. However, PAX GAIA transcends national boundaries, for it translates to the peace of earth and thus offers a holistic view of peace, including all men and nature, touching themes of military, economy, politics, culture, and environment. The aim of this week is to inculcate the youth, the future of our world, with the values that are much needed to build a sustainable world. We welcome all our guests from institutions across India and abroad to our webinar.
We will now introduce Dr. Vibha Singh Chauhan, principal of Kirori Mal College, who is also the patron of our club. She is an expert on concepts such as gender studies, cultural studies, non-urban livelihoods, and protest movements. She is also the founder secretary of the group Health, Equality, and Literacy Movements, along with being a generous leader who gave us this pioneer opportunity to conduct this event, and without whose continuous support and guidance, this would not have been possible.
Our principal had just left some time back, and she's caught in traffic jam. It rained heavily in this city, so she's caught in the jam. She hasn't reached her home. She sends her best wishes for today's program, and as soon as she's back home, she will try to join. She sends her all the best, and to our eminent speakers, her gratitude, and to all of our participants, she's very grateful, and she really regrets that she's caught in the traffic jam and she's driving.
All right, I think that is quite understandable to all the professionals who have joined us. In any case, thank you, ma'am, for your reminder and for your update. Let us continue. Peace is not a singular object, but rather one having a plethora of dimensions. In this age, it is important to talk of peace before acting upon it. Thus, the theme of our webinar is peace building, the quintessential role of military and economy. We have on board two very distinguished, very renowned speakers with decades of experience in their fields who will enlighten us about the intricacies involved in peace building and how military and economy can be used to secure a world of greater cooperation and world and peace amongst the countries. Without delaying further, let us jump into the webinar. I take immense pleasure in introducing our speakers, a renowned economist from International Monetary Fund and a dynamic army officer who served in Somalia as a part of United Nations Peacekeeping Organization, Dr. Shweta and Captain Vijay. Our webinar starts with Dr. Shweta. Dr. Sweta Saxena is currently on leave from the International Monetary Fund to serve as the chief in the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, that is UNESCAP, in Bangkok, Thailand. At the IMF, she has worked on multilateral surveillance for G20 countries in the research department and on fragile countries in the African department. Dr. Shweta has published extensively, including in American Economical Review, Journal of Economic Literature, and the Journal of International Economics. Prior to joining IMF, she worked at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, and as an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh in the United States. She obtained her PhD in economics from the University of Washington, an MA in economics from the Delhi School of Economics, and a BA in economics from much closer to our home, Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi. Dear Dr. Shweta, would you kindly like to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you, Kushi. Thank you so much, actually, for this really nice introduction. And I think you said whatever there was to say about it, actually, about me. So I'm not going to go into it. However, having said that, let me just load quickly the presentation I'm planning on making. Or did you want to introduce our second guest right now, Kushi? Or you'll introduce?
I would love to do that, but we thought that when the second part commences, we can introduce Dr. Vijay.
Okay,
Captain great.
Vijay. Okay, so let me just share my screen right now and kind of start off with you guys. So thank you. First of all, a very good evening to all my friends, and it's a nice homecoming, given I am from its alma mater. Delhi University is my alma mater. I've been to actually LSR and Delhi School of Economics, so it's very nice to be back. And can people just turn their microphones off if you're not speaking? And it's really nice to be back, because actually it was almost a decade ago that I did a presentation for some of the students at St. Stephen's. So thank you, Kushi, for actually, and your PAX GAIA club for inviting me. So before I go on, I really want to actually make a disclaimer here that views expressed here are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the IMF or the United Nations that I work for. So this is a very important topic, and thank you for choosing me to actually, say something to find out about my journey, my own, views on this very jaded topic of world peace. So let's actually begin coming to the original topic of world peace. Basically, it's been so incessantly used to be taken seriously by anybody. It's been mocked in movies from being the perfect answer to a miscongeniality contest. And global peace has almost become sort of like a utopian concept, something I don't think anybody believes we can achieve. And given what we see around the world, like, we tend to have conflicts, so it does seem like an unachievable goal. And what is going on in our neighborhood is also no exception. So having said that, actually, when Kushi asked me actually to do this, she gave me a lot of questions, and and one of the first questions she was asking me was to talk about myself. She's already talked a lot about myself, actually, so I don't need to go into it. So I thought I'm going to actually frame, given that this topic is about economics, and that's all I've done ever since I left high school, long time ago. So I thought I'm actually going to frame this topic in a much wider sort of a net. Okay, she asked me, when can economics and peace go together? Are these two sides of the same coin? Is one necessary for the others? And along the story I'm going to tell you, hopefully I'll answer all the questions. And Kushi, let me know at the end if I didn't answer all your questions. So I'll frame it within a much broader context of sustainability, because I think that's what your own PAX GAIA, the club, actually is trying to do. Look at sustainability along all three dimensions of development, which are basically economic, social, and environmental. So most of you wouldn't know, probably, because if you are an undergrad student at University of Delhi University, you were not born in 2000. But back in 2000, the global community had adopted something called the Millennium Development Goals. They were called the MDGs, and they had very specific goals in mind, thinking about, let's halve the poverty rates around the world, and let's actually halt the spread of HIV/AIDS, provide universal primary education. And they wanted to do all this in the next 15 years. So that was the target. It was 2015. So 2015 came, and of course, much had been done, but much needed to be done still. So what they actually ended up doing was, in 2015, the entire global community came together and ushered in this bold and transformative, as we call it at the UN, basically the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, what is it? Some of you might know, some of you might not know. So let me just actually briefly tell you that this 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we very nicely actually call SDGs. And they form a shared vision of humanity, people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. Now, this development paradigm is a lot more ambitious than what the global community had actually envisioned back in 2000 under the MDGs. Now, back under the MDGs, a lot of emphasis was on the quantity, and so now we are moving a little bit more towards the quality. For instance, under the MDGs, the whole goal on education was to get enrollments up, right? However, under the SDGs, there are targets, and basically that include proficiency in reading and mathematics. And they also, SDGs also have, they take a holistic view of sustainability along all dimensions. So it has a lot of environmental component in there as well. So as you can see that, peace and partnership in these 5 P's, as we call them, peace and partnership are the underpinnings to achieve the other 3 P's, which basically are people, planet, and prosperity. And among these 17 goals sit basically very comfortably this goal number 16, which is called peace, justice, and strong institutions. Okay. And while all these three topics of peace, justice, and institutions, they're kind of linked, but what I'm going to do first is basically we'll try to understand peace. And to understand peace, we need to understand its antithesis, basically, which is nothing but conflict. So within this context of how economic views the role of institutions, governance, and this idea of justice, I'm going to actually walk you through this entire thing. So I started off asking, is world peace possible? So I'm going to actually give you how economics views peace, actually how structure of economy or some economic policies can lead to conflicts and wars or whatever you want to call them, and how conflicts can actually have an impact on economics. And is there something international financial institutions can do? And then I'll actually talk about, is there something inherently in economics that can help us achieve peace or not? If not, then what exactly is it? And I'll bring you back to the first question in the end about, is global peace, is world peace possible? So here we go. In economics, we recognize that conflicts could arise due to a number of reasons. So here, why do conflicts happen? And let's see how sometimes the economic structures and some aspects of the economy, they can increase the likelihood of conflicts. So for instance, economists talk a lot about rent seeking. And what is rent seeking? It's nothing, it's a concept in economics that talks that individuals and entities seek to increase their own wealth without creating any benefit or wealth for the rest. And it tends to happen a lot in economies that are in countries that tend to be more rich in natural resources like oil and minerals and all. So these resources are kind of, basically there are few resources. To control these few resources, there are usually coups and wars in these sort of countries. And as even foreign countries want to control those resources. So think about why Africa was colonized. And I think maybe you shouldn't even go to Africa. Think about why India was colonized, partly basically because of all the resources that we had. So countries with natural resources, they tend to have lots of conflicts. And such conflicts also tend to have rampant corruption. And having natural resources, a lot of the times we say it's seen as basically a curse rather than a boon. This is not to say that economies that do not have natural resources, everything is hunky-dory there. We do tend to see a lot of non-resource rich countries that tend to have rent-seeking activities. The prime example is United States. You have big lobbyists, basically, they pay for the campaigns of the congressmen, and they get them to implement policies that would benefit the few. And in effect, actually, what ends up happening, all the people who have voted for these politicians, actually, when the government gets elected, it's actually instituting policies that benefit very few. And what are you going to see? If it's benefiting only few, of course, majority of the people are going to be discontent, right? They'll be dissatisfied. And that's kind of what we see. I mean, like, whether you look at it in BLM movement, it's a manifestation of what's going on from the economic side, sort of showing up in these sort of conflicts. Or you see in France, in Jean Jaurès, I mean, like, you do find a lot, and this is happening a lot in the Western countries right now, just to actually give you an example. But again, another thing that economists tend to actually emphasize a lot is the role of institutions. Okay, and this particular literature more recently was popularized by an economist known as Daron Acemoglu and his co-authors. Although back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of literature on these sort of issues were done by Doug North, who's a Nobel laureate already. So what they did, and this was quite an interesting paper that came out in 2001 in the American Economic Review. And their hypothesis was very simple. They said, when all these European colonists, basically, they were trying to actually colonize different countries around the world. If they went to those countries and they saw that they were dying, or for whatever reason, they could not actually settle, their mortality rates were very high. So just to give you an example, I mean, like, if you go to Africa, thanks to malaria, I mean, like, a lot of these people would be sick and they would be dying. And if all these colonizers were dying in these countries, they didn't want to live there, but they kind of still wanted those resources that I talked about, right? So what they ended up doing, they really actually forced very extractive institutions in these countries. which means that they could stay far away, but they could still extract all these. So corruption and bribery and all those kind of things started creeping in these economies. And through their empirical research, they do show, it was an most interesting paper. They show that if you control for all these, then growth for different countries are not very different. If you control for the quality of institutions, taking account of what the settlers' mortality was, right? And Acemoglu and Robinson, they popularized this entire idea. Also, if you want to read their book, actually, Why Nations Fail. So institutions tend to matter a lot, we in economics believe. Now, of course, rent-seeking activities and corrupt institutions would suggest that most of the resources are being held in the hands of few people. So what happens? Not surprisingly, there are inequalities in opportunities. And what I mean by inequalities in opportunity, it just means that you don't actually have access to healthcare, to education in order to get yourself educated and rise up the social and economic ladder. So that's a lack of opportunities. And it also shows up in the inequality in outcomes, which means most of the incomes are basically held by the top few. I mean, like you can see it around the world. I mean, like I think the billionaires are just like 50 of them. You can actually look up the numbers. Very few people. Those guys control about 50 or 60% of the global wealth, right? Just the top 100 people or something like that. So you see the inequality. Now, what is the problem with all this? Of course, as I said, too much inequality would lead to social discontent. And of course, another thing that happens when you have very high levels of inequality and very persistent, that means it's not even coming down. Then what you tend to see is intergenerational inequality. And if anybody is interested, or anybody who's a student of economics can go and look at the work. Actually, Raj Chetty has done very nice work on this intergenerational mobility. But anyways, what the concept basically tells you is that if you see on the right-hand side, the graph, basically it shows you that countries that tend to have high inequality tend to have lower intergenerational mobility. That means people who are born poor, they remain poor. They cannot rise up. Okay, so that's, and of course, the other thing is when people can't rise up and they know, and parents know that their kids don't have opportunities, so it leads to more social discontent. And what you see when you have high level of, or low level rather, I should actually point it out here, like if you have low level of intergenerational mobility, which is on the horizontal axis, you tend to have high number of incidents, events of social unrest. So this kind of tells you that how sometimes the economic structures and a lot of the times, sometimes policies of the governments actually tend to exacerbate inequalities, and high and persistent inequality leads to conflict. And it can happen, and a lot of the time, some of these inequalities can happen actually within nations and across nations, all sorts of things, and that leads to conflict. Now, this was the impact I showed you from inequality to economics to conflicts, right? But conflicts also have an impact on the economy. And this was something that my co-author Valerie Serra and I, we've shown in our paper back in 2008 in the American Economic Review. It's not only for political crisis, but if you have any sort of crisis, you have a financial crisis, you have a political crisis, change of governments and civil wars, whatever, what you end up seeing is that output level in your countries, they come down when the shock happens, and it never goes back up again to the pre-crisis or pre-shock trend. Okay, and let me actually tell you, because in economics, we had a very popular, when I was a student, I think now it's finally after our paper, it's been taken out of our economics books, the concept of business cycles. So we believe that you come down, you grow really fast, and you go back up again, basically along the trend. So all these countries I'm showing you here, these are just, we've shown it through other empirical work. It holds for a large set of countries, but here are just examples of Burundi, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Sierra Leone. They all had civil wars. And when the civil war happened, do you see the output that was going up, the GDP? It came down. And once the war was gone, it's not that they went back up to the same trend, that dashed line. They started growing from the lower level. That means all that wedge was created between the dashed line and the solid line. It's an output lost forever. And more as economists, we do understand that this is a big cost, and we try to actually tell countries to have policies in place so that they don't have these shocks. Or if they actually have these shocks, they need to actually employ their policies in such a way to get back to the pre-crisis trend. Now, the thing is, given that we actually have, for whatever reason, conflicts happen between countries, within countries, what it also means that countries have to spend a lot of money on defense, okay? And while we need it because you have borders to protect and your peoples to protect, but think about an opportunity cost. As an economist, we think of the money you're spending on defense means the money you cannot spend on building roads, building hospitals, building schools. So this is the opportunity cost of actually not having peace in the world. A lot of money gets spent on this. I wouldn't call it unproductive actually, but the point is, you get my point, that it's not going to be spent on things that you want it to be spent on. So that's why if we actually have sort of Ram Rajya, actually we don't have to spend a lot of money. Everybody can actually have good schooling, good access to help and everything. So here I've actually shown you how economic structures, economic policies can have an impact on conflicts. And again, conflicts can also have an impact on the economy. It's sort of a little bit of a two-way street, basically. And to figure it out, it's intertwined, basically. And that's why we tend to, as economists, we emphasize that policymakers should maintain stable macroeconomic situation in their countries so that they don't have conflicts. They can avoid conflicts. And even when countries have had, all these conflicts, economists have gone back in those countries actually to help them rebuild their economies, okay? So here are some of the international financial institutions you see, like the World Bank and the IMF. Basically, they are called the Bretton Woods institutions, formed after the Second World War. Part of the reason, their whole reason for existence was so in order to actually not have the World War again, sort of to provide resources so that countries can maintain stable macroeconomic conditions, and eventually they wouldn't go to war. I mean, like that was sort of the idea, so that we can maintain economic stability to avoid conflicts and maintain peace. And in fact, when at the IMF, I've worked on two fragile countries, post-conflict countries, Sierra Leone and South Sudan. And lo and behold, they both are commodity producing countries. Sierra Leone has diamonds, South Sudan has oil, okay? And remember, I was talking about how a lot of these countries, they tend to actually get in conflicts within, I mean, they can have civil wars, other countries they can go to war with other countries, all sorts of things happen. And these are classic example. So I'll just actually tell you briefly my work. Here I'm actually going to tell you, I know Kushi wanted to know more about what I've done basically. So when I worked at the IMF, when I worked on Sierra Leone, so just to give you a sense, Sierra Leone had a civil war for about 11 years, from 1991 to 2002. So in the post-conflict years, the international community would try to actually help rebuild the country and its economy. And so the IMF would lend money to Sierra Leone to set up institutions, build macroeconomic buffers, maintain a stable economy. So in 2010, when I was working on Sierra Leone, I helped design a macroeconomic program whereby we would lend money to Sierra Leone. So this is the one that you see up on the top, May 19, 2010, when it was approved by the board. Basically, we formed a program for them. We said, you're going to get the money actually as long as you do some of the things, which means structural reforms. What kind of structural reforms? Improve your tax administration, increase your tax collections, improve your efficiency of public spending. So if you're spending $1 on the people should be able to actually get the benefit of $1 and not just 10 cents, okay? So all those kind of things are the things that they needed to do in order to get the money under the program that we had planned. The other country I worked on was more interesting, actually. After I worked on Sierra Leone, I worked on South Sudan. So it was back in 2011, South Sudan was supposed to become independent in July. So as you see on the right-hand side, they actually they asked the IMF in April 2011, they said, we want to become a member. And it was quite interesting. So I was a part of the team that first went to South Sudan, and we went to South Sudan in Juba when it was still a part of Sudan. So technically I've been to Sudan because at that time it wasn't an independent country when I went in May of 2011, when it was still a part of Sudan. Now, South Sudan has been at war with the North for a long time, and South Sudan actually possesses all the oil fields. Okay, so when the two countries were getting independence, I mean, like were getting separated actually, and South Sudan was getting its independence, they had to deal with three big issues. How to split the oil revenues. Because before independence, of course, they were splitting the oil revenues 50-50 between the two, but how it's going to be shared later on still needed to be determined. So when we went there. Second was Sudan owed a lot of government debt from the international community. So the whole idea was, how are we going to split this debt when South Sudan becomes independent? So they said that, well, we'll see actually how the international community behaves in terms of giving us debt forgiveness. And the third issue was South Sudan said that once we get independence, we will issue our own currency. We are not going to actually honor these Sudanese pounds anymore. So what's going to happen to the Sudanese pound? That was also quite interesting. What would happen to their future needed to be determined. But anyways, when South Sudan had asked the IMF that they wanted to become a member, they also asked us that they should be given technical assistance in order to build a new nation. And that time, a team, we actually formed a multi-donor trust fund in order to provide them capacity building. So on April 28th of 2012, South Sudan finally became the 187th member of the IMF when it signed the documents at this US State Department in Washington, DC, as you can see the picture on the left-hand side. That's how you become a member. You go to the US State Department, there's a little book actually, and your finance minister goes and signs actually something there, and you become the member of the IMF and the World Bank together, by the way. But interestingly enough, I just wanted to give you a personal story on South Sudan, because the whole excitement about getting independence, it didn't last too long. Okay, South Sudan, just to give you a sense of that country, it's the size of France. And it had, at least at the time, 100 kilometers of paved roads. So you can imagine the infrastructure needs of the country and how much of financing it needed in order to build all that infrastructure. So soon after independence, of course, the two nations, they kind of went loggerhead with each other over oil revenue, to say the least. And as I said, I told you one thing, that all the oil fields are up down in the south, right? What I didn't tell you, with all the oil pipelines, they ran through the north. So if South Sudan needed to export all that oil, it had to use the pipelines that were going through Sudan. So at that time, interestingly enough, South Sudan said that, you know what, instead of, I think it was less than $1, the international fee to use the pipelines is just generally less than $1 per barrel. But they asked for about $40 a barrel. And given I used to estimate their oil revenues and their fiscal revenues, I knew exactly what was going on. They had asked for a fee of $40, close to $40, which would almost be like splitting the oil revenues as they did before independence, before the countries got split. South Sudan said it didn't want to actually give its resources to its neighbors. So it just decided in July of 2013, it decided we are not going to produce any. They literally shut their all their oil production, as if they were taps, and they just shut them off. They said, no, we are not going to produce it. And think about a country when 98% of their fiscal revenues, 99% of their exports, they come from oil. What's going to happen? They didn't have the money. And the worst part was the entire international community was against South Sudan for shutting its oil production. So they didn't get any help from any international financial institutions or the donor community. And what was the sad part, why I brought this actually, is that with no money to run the state, corruption immediately crept in. And this is something I saw it manifested right in front of my own eyes, basically. So they had done this in July, and I went there later in the year. One time I was just going, it's on a personal level, I'm telling a story where I was actually going from one meeting to the other. I was in my car, and all of a sudden some policemen and a policewoman, they pulled us over, and they were trying to harass my driver, basically. And what they were trying to do was basically ask for bribes, because, and I was ready with my phone, actually. I had my hand on my phone to call up the UN office or my IMF team members, basically. Nothing of that sort happened, but they let us go eventually, because the government had no money to pay their employees. Of course, people didn't have any money. They weren't actually getting any salaries. So what they were trying to do was just to actually intimidate people in order to be able to get some bribes and basically make some money. And it was quite sad, basically, because within no time, I saw all the exuberance of the independence and of an independent nation, actually everything just completely withered away. And what I was seeing was basically corruption setting in. And I know once corruption sets in, it becomes embedded in the system, and it's so hard to get rid of. And there's a lot of literature and economics that also shows that corruption and lack of governance are a big hindrance in the path of economic growth and economic development. So this was my personal story. I hope, Khushi, this is enough actually to tell you about my personal experiences on this one, but it was quite interesting. I left working on this in January of 2014. It's been more than 8 years, and I don't think things have changed much in South Sudan. So to give you a sense how it is so hard, even after you don't have a war, sort of how to build peace and build your institutions and get your economy all together. So I've talked a lot about all the other issues, but the most important issue that I think I was asked to talk about is the crux of the problem. Can economic growth alone help us achieve the lofty goal of world peace? And this is a topic I have been thinking for a really, really long time. I've written long blogs about it. I do write a personal blog on these questioning that when the world is experiencing the highest level of prosperity we've ever seen, why don't we have peace? Why don't we have sanity? Why don't we have contentment? Why don't we have social justice? Why don't we have environmental justice? I mean, like, these are questions to ponder about. I've been questioning the assumptions in economics. You know, we make a lot of assumptions in economics. As the joke always goes, ask an economist, how do you do this? They say, just assume, you know, blah, blah. So let me actually just quickly tell you that since the time of Adam Smith, basically, he's called our father of economics. Economists have taken this quote a tad too seriously, in my opinion, and also misquoted Adam Smith in order to just fit their own agenda. So he had said that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard to their own self-interest. So basically, all the economists have believed that capitalist economies can function only by providing opportunities for people to advance their own self-interest. Now, this kind of thinking is very, very unique to economics, okay? Because economists believe self-interest would generate a system that would be beneficial for all, okay? However, more recently, these assumptions have been questioned, and including by some Nobel laureates, like, you know, if you read the work of George Akerlof, Bob Schiller, and Richard Thaler, they've been questioning the outcomes resulting from this self-interest alongside free markets, okay? And from focusing primarily on economic growth, what it basically tells you is that the only way we can have the system going is by consuming more and more. And it puts us in this vicious circle of selfishness because our wants are unlimited. Any economic student in the audience would know that our wants are unlimited, but resources are limited. And if we continue to satisfy unlimited wants with our limited resources, we know we can never achieve the sustainability that this club, PAX GAIA', is talking about. And also, basically, just to actually tell you that economics is the only profession that places so much emphasis on these external values: consumption, profit, competition. It stands completely in contrast with a lot of the other disciplines like sociology, anthropology, psychology. They emphasize a lot on internal values. So just to quote actually one psychologist, Tim Kessler, he said that people with primarily materialistic values, you know, that care about material things, they lack empathy, they are unhappier, they have fewer friends, and are even in poorer health than those who grant greater importance to internal values. So basically, what are these internal values? They're nothing but compassion, cooperation, and altruism. And a lot of behavioral science research actually tells you that people are not selfish in general. People tend to be a lot more cooperative. They tend to be a lot more altruistic and compassionate. And in fact, if I were to ever talk about this topic of how economics can achieve, like, you know, help achieve world peace, or, you know, can contribute towards world peace, there is never a moment I cannot bring my idol, Bobby Kennedy. And this is a quote from Bobby Kennedy about more than 50 years ago. He said it in a speech that he gave in March of 1968, a couple of months before he was assassinated. And he talked about a country. He was talking about America, a country whose constitution endorses the pursuit of happiness as an unalienable right alongside life and liberty. So he questioned, actually, what is it that all this, you know, this whole madness about let's have economic growth. And that time back 50 years ago, we used to calculate more like gross national product, which is GNP here, and not gross domestic product as we do now, but it tells you the same story. And it starts off, actually, you've got to actually go and listen to it on your own sometime. Just Google it and you'll find his audio also and a video also probably. Even if we act to erase material poverty. So if actually everybody has roti kapda makan, like, you know, everybody has food, shelter, and clothing, we confront the poverty of satisfaction, purpose, and dignity that afflicts us all. Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in a mere accumulation of material things. And he actually goes on to list, if you read the entire thing, we act in our calculation of economic growth, in our GDP, we calculate the guns that we produce, the air pollution, the cigarettes, the locks we produce to actually, protect ourselves against others, all the jails that we are actually building in order to, send all these people who are breaking our locks. I mean, all sorts of things we include in this GDP. So what exactly is this gross national product or gross domestic product calculating? It calculates all these, but it does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It doesn't include the beauty of our poetry, the strength of our marriage, the intelligence of our public debate, or integrity of our public officials. And it, it measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans, okay? So he said that about 50 years ago, and he said that if this holds for America, it holds for everybody else. And he couldn't be more on the mark. 50 years ago, he said that, just actually accumulating more and more and more and more and more is never actually gonna give you that satisfaction. Because what afflicts us is poverty of satisfaction, purpose and dignity, okay? And I actually just want to show you that if only we had listened to that, I think the world would be in a better place right now. We wouldn't have been so crazily consuming like crazy as we do. We all talk about material things all the time. What can I buy? Oh, there's an eye. How many of, I don't know, actually, if I could do by show of hands, how many have already ordered their iPhone 13 or whatever, right? It's all this craziness about material things, okay? So just to give you a sense that the way we've been living, okay, it has got to change. There is no way we can go on living the way we've been living. And this sort of captures a little bit of that aspect. And I'll tell you what this picture means to you. But what Bobby Kennedy was actually saying, what matters for peace is basically not monetary things, but it's non-monetary things, okay? It's non-monetary things that make our lives more worthwhile. And it's become so much more important now because we have trade-offs, and some of the trade-offs are not very pleasant ones. And remember I started off saying that I'm going to talk about peace within the broader concept of sustainability, because peace means more than absence of physical wars. It also means peaceful coexistence with other animals and nature, okay? So the basic thing here, what you see is that it's showing on the vertical axis a human development index, which means as we actually develop along our human wants and all the things that we need for our sustenance, those are along that lines on the vertical axis, and along the horizontal axis is how much of ecological footprints are we leaving when we are consuming all these things. And there is a limit, by the way. So the vertical line at 1.7 is basically is sort of a limit that how much the earth can support, okay? How much all the ecology and all the nature, actually everything can support. So what you see is that in order to satisfy more and more of our material wants, which is as high as we go up and up and up on the vertical axis, what we are doing is we are actually going towards the right also, because it's an upward sloping curve, basically, if you see, which means we are transgressing the planetary boundaries. And in short, what basically it's trying to say is that something has got to give in. We cannot continue to live our lives the way we've been living. We've been at war, not with amongst ourselves. First of all, there is a war within ourselves. Then there is war within countries. There are wars between countries. And there's another war that I didn't even touch, actually, which is basically the war that we human beings tend to have in nature. Okay, and this cannot go on. And I was just hoping that this pandemic has taught us all how priceless some of these experiences that we had last year. At least everybody was going gaga over that. Oh, this has given us an opportunity to realize how great relationships are. I hope this continues for a while, actually. And so I told you that I'm going to bring the talk back to the first question I started with. Is world peace a utopia or an achievable goal? Can we actually achieve this goal? And I think it's achievable. Personally, I do believe, because world peace is nothing but summing up the world peace of every single country. And the peace of every single country is actually the summation of peace of every individual. So yes, the lofty goal of world peace can be reduced to individual peace. And so instead of focusing on world peace, why don't we focus on ourselves, on just one person, It's very easy to take care of that. So now I'm actually going to ask you, and I want a little bit of a participation just for 2 minutes. And if you've woken up from your long nap that you've been taking for the last 20-30 minutes I've been talking, so why don't you do one thing? Why don't you pull your cell phones out, go to slido.com, put in this number 864-941, or you could also use this QR code. And what you're going to see is something like this. So what you have to answer is, what does peace mean to you? And you can put in a word, when it comes to peace, what comes to your mind? You can enter your word, and it's going to show up in a cloud. And I'm just going to go, just hold on for a minute. Let me share. Okay, there is. Okay, yeah. So what you'll see is this. What you can do is go in and put in the word that you think, what peace means to you. And we will see what the answers are. I'll give you 2 minutes. So if you have been able to do it, I'll stop the first one. How's that? And you can add more responses. You just don't have to do one. I mean, I can actually add more. So I'm just showing you that. Okay. So why don't you add, and it'll finally put a word crowd. It'll show what was the word that received the most thought from you. So I want to dip into all your collective wisdom. I'll give you 2 minutes. How's that? And at 2 minutes, we'll see where we end up being. You haven't even logged in.
Shweta, can you kindly show us the code once again?
The code? Oh, code. Okay, sure. Code is 864941. 864941. Can you see this, Kushi?
Yes, wonderful.
Okay, so I'll actually just turn the clock on for 2 minutes. Just go on putting whatever comes to your mind. Put more than one, it doesn't matter. What does peace mean to you? Oh, we are not converging on anything. So it's been 2 minutes actually, and it seemed that we didn't converge on what exactly we all are thinking of what peace means. Peace means different things to different people. Okay. And that's perfectly fine. But some of the things that stand out are basically love, happiness. You can see freedom, coexistence, independence. Actually, recently I learned there's a big difference between freedom and independence, but we are not going to go into that debate right now. But anyways, we sort of have an idea among ourselves what we mean by freedom, by peace. So let me actually talk. So it appears everybody knows what peace is. So we just need to find it within ourselves. That's at the end of the day, that's what it is, just hold on, stop this share and I'll actually do a new share. Can I do a new share? Go back to my slides. Okay, so and each of us needs to find our own path to whatever we want to call that peace, salvation, moksha, nirvana, whatever name you understand it goes by. And here I want to end actually. Kushera asked me to talk a lot about myself. I didn't, only I told my experience actually, but I want to end this talk on a very personal note. So I believe that we all are very lucky to be born in this land called Bharata. And we have a vast pool of Vedic wisdom to draw on. And we can do that. For that, we need to do you can do so many things. I mean, like, and you can start from anywhere. And I'll give you my own personal experience of what I have done. So here you go. I read, whenever I'm in doubt, I actually go down and dip into the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it actually gives you the wisdom to know what exactly peace is. Okay. So here you go. And I just want to actually read out 2 of the shlokas for you. So the first one is Trividham nakshayedam dwaram nashnam atmanah kama krodhas tatha lobhas tasmad etatrayam tejet. Where basically Lord Krishna is telling there are 3 gates leading to the hell of self-destruction for the soul: lust, anger, and greed. Therefore, we need to abandon all of them. If it wasn't for our lust, anger, and greed, we wouldn't be fighting for our humanity right now, survival right now. We are fighting with nature, basically. So think about actually on a broader scale what it basically tells you. And the other one is Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Kama Esha Krodesha Rajoguna Samudbhava Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyenam Ihi Verinam, where the Supreme Lord says it is lust alone which is born of contact with the mode of passion and later transformed into anger. Know this as the sinful, all-devouring and mean the world. So as I said, that we can actually choose, all of us can choose whichever way. I mean, like, we want to achieve peace, and peace within ourselves. Peace within ourselves will lead to global peace anyways, but we need to ensure that our chosen paths are leading to peace within us and with others. And so what I do actually, for me, I practice the Bhakti Yoga, which basically means I move away from these lower modes of tamas, which is ignorance, and rajas, which is passion, and move towards the higher mode of goodness, which is sattvic. And I totally understand that once we all are situated in the sattvic mode, no matter how we get there, it doesn't matter whether you read the Bhagavad Gita or whatever, it actually would, howsoever you get there, we are bound to live in harmony with ourselves, with others, and with nature. And this is, after all, sustainability we have been talking about. And I think, and I completely understand, it is all within me and it starts with me. So Hare Krishna, thank you so much for listening. Over to you, Kushi.
Thank you, Dr. Shweta, for your enlightening talk. Your presence certainly took our event to new heights. And we are sure students were enlightened by your dynamic energy and your eloquent expertise. And if you allow, can we begin with the question and answers round? So the first question we have for you is, how do you view the current position of India in peace building on economic front? Over to you.
Sorry, I had muted myself, sorry. So how do you see, which is the first question about, yeah, actually one thing I didn't talk much about was in my talk about what the role India can play, basically. Again, any nation can, I mean, there are lots of things India can do, basically. Okay, first of all, what India needs to do is to find peace within itself as well. Okay, so when India is peaceful itself, of course, it's gonna actually encourage peace around. But lots of things, I mean, like India has been doing a lot in terms of actually having, through diplomacy. Like think about our recently during COVID, what did it do? It actually had a very good policy of giving free medicines to neighbors and all this in the region, basically, and even to the rest of the world. That's part of the diplomacy that you do in order to encourage goodwill and have it be reciprocated. Because, if you do good to others, they will do good to you. So that's one way of doing it. And of course, encouraging more economic integration, basically with its neighbors. And India tries to do a lot. I mean, like just as an example, I mean, like through SAARC, it tends to encourage a lot more trade opportunities that its neighbors can have. So through trade, we tend, I mean, like, this is what economists have always believed. You can actually achieve the peace, a political end through economic means. And that was the whole reason for the formation of the Euro area. You know, they didn't want countries to go to war, and that's why they actually had more economic integration. So one of the ways India can actually encourage more peace and help the region is through building more economic cooperation amongst them neighboring countries. That's go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We were really captivated by your words. So we have another question for you. Since you have been part of IMF, so can you share some of your experiences and one instance that marked you as a person?
I shouldn't be saying this, but I think it's the IMF policy that marked me as a person I am, because I'm so opposed to some of the things actually. So actually, it's more that, you know, thinking about the policies in general over time. Not particularly anything at the IMF, actually. Not at the it's actually, for me, it was more the narrative I saw the economists have built over time, and how it was just not sort of coexisting with the peace or whatever you want in the world. Like, you know, you find wide disparities. As I said, the only reason I started questioning a lot of these assumptions in economics, it wasn't so much actually at the IMF. Yeah, I was working at the IMF, but I could have been anywhere else also, actually, by the way, at the time. So it had nothing to do with the IMF. But my point was actually, when I was seeing so much of disparity, I mean, like, you know, this is the best the world has ever seen. We've never seen this much prosperity. I think nobody should be going to bed hungry. But why do we actually tend to have that? Okay, so that was a turning moment for me, actually, when I started thinking about these bigger questions of, like, you know, when we shouldn't be living in war, when there should be peacetime. I mean, like, this prosperity we've never seen. So that was, to me, was the first time. It was almost like an awakening, sort of, you know, my eureka moment. Hey, why don't we have that? We need more sustainability. And that's part of the reason why, when I got the opportunity to work at the UN, so I said, oh, you know, sustainability is their thing. So I'm going to come. And something I have done in my last 3 years, I've been at the UN, 3.5 years, I write the flagship publication here. We've been trying to change the narrative of, like, you know, too much focus on economic growth leads not to sustainability in a bigger sense of the word, like whether economic, social, or environmental. So you need to think of sustainability more or less, think it in a more holistic manner rather than focusing so much on economic growth. And I see everybody gets very excited with these numbers that are going to come out. Actually, I think in, what is it, September, in a couple of weeks, IMF is going to come out with new numbers on economic growth about every single country in the world, and everybody gets excited. Oh, the growth is up, growth is down. And it has always confounded me. I said, I mean, like, even if India is growing at 10%, just assume, how does it actually affect the Joe on the street? That should be our goal, right? It's not the aggregate number, I mean, like, you know, at the top, basically, that's growing, but how does it actually have an impact on an individual? So that's kind of, if I can just close this answer by saying that it wasn't so much at the IMF, but I could have been anywhere and I still would have thought about the same problems. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, ma'am. That was very stimulating. And having said that, we thank you for this knowledgeable speech, and we hope to continue being in touch with you for our future events as well. And since we have Khushi Nigam with us as our General Secretary. Yeah.
There is another person who would love to ask a very interesting question. If you would like to participate, Weber, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask Dr. Shweta your question.
Thank you, Khushi. Good evening, ma'am. Weber from Political Science Department this side. Ma'am, recently we saw El Salvador giving a legal tender status to Bitcoin. So one of the imperatives behind the policy was to safeguard the country from vagaries of US Fed or the Central Reserve. So when we talk about inequity as a challenge to global peace, so how do you see this de-dollarization as a movement towards equality? But at the same time, how do you take into context the differences in digital capabilities in that come into play while minting Bitcoins or cryptocurrencies, as well as terror fundings that can go through, that can happen through these anonymous blockchain networks?
Okay, if I can actually answer this very complicated question you've asked, Vaibhav, actually, more in an easier way. I'm not so sure Bitcoin can actually, be a solution, be an answer to all the conflicts, and it can be the solution as world peace. I don't think so. One of the things Bitcoin people talk about, actually, a lot of these digital currencies and fintech and all, is basically it's going to include it's going to have an impact on financial inclusion, which means bringing more and more people into the financial net. Basically, they have access to banking, they can actually borrow money, start their own businesses. So that's when people tend to have, and that's why I always say that, economists have always seen economics means as being a way to get to the political end, basically not have conflicts, end wars, have more integration, right? So one of the ways, it's not through Bitcoin or something. Hegemony of the United States does not have to be actually about Bitcoins and, we're going to compete with them on Bitcoins. Hegemony of the dollar is hard to actually beat, given that 70% of all the transactions in the world, they take place in dollars. So no country, no currency can compete with the dollar. And that's their strength. That's the American strength, actually. It comes from having that strong currency, the dollar. Okay, so I don't think that's what we're going to compete on, but we can compete on having a strong economy which is inclusive, and which is based not on principles that the Western culture believes are the ways to live. And that's why I kind of, what I was trying to end, and the talk was more on a concept of, I need to find my own path to peace. Okay, having a big car and a huge house and 2 dogs in the house, which is the American dream, is not necessarily the dream I want to have and I should have. I should have my own dream of how I need to live, right? So countries need to actually also think about sustainability of their own economies. Something that, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with having, saying that, we are going to start. It's not about being anti-foreign, it's about being pro your own. Okay, so there's nothing wrong, actually. Why do you need to buy things from abroad, where, the basis for trade is always in economics, we say somebody has a comparative advantage. Somebody can produce the same good as you can, but at a cheaper cost, right? Cheaper cost means lower price. But there are lots of things that we can produce as well as any other country. Why do we need to import those? Okay, build your own industries, build your own manufacturing, have people create jobs for people. People will actually have, they're not going to be out on the streets. They're not going to be out on the streets. They're not going to actually have, you're not going to have social unrest. So you make people, sort of bring them in a way where they can lead decent and sort of, what can I call, lives with purpose. Okay, with dignity. They can live with dignity and peace. Okay. So digital currency is not what we are going to be competing with the US on, okay? Don't think that's their hegemony. If I've answered your question, but it's not that. But I think India needs to think a little bit more strategically about how it needs to actually show itself as a leader on the global scale. And economics is one way of doing it. Military is another way of doing it. And some of the leaders right now, India, US and China, they understand that, right? Economies are large, militaries are large, basically. And the third are basically some of the soft things that we can compete on. Just now, the performance in the Olympics was just very heartening. These are the soft things that you can actually compete on and influence the world. And India has a lot of potential there. So no, digital currency is not that India should have it right now and have Bitcoins. Yeah, if I answered your question, Weber. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your remarks. I think this completely answers the question asked by Weber.
Mm-hmm.
So now I request our guests and audiences to have 5-minute break.
Without further ado, let us now commence the second half of our webinar. But before that, I would once again like to thank Dr. Shweta for her very enlightening, very touching talk. Now, Moving on, the second speaker in our event is Captain A. Vijay Srinivas. Sir was trained at the Officers Training Academy, that is OTA, in Chennai during 1989 to 1990 in basic warfare, leadership, and command elements. He commissioned as an army officer in the 2nd Battalion Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry. Sir has also served at the Siachen Glacier at the Line of Control, LOC. Further, Captain Vijay has the unique experience of serving in Somalia under United Nations Peacekeeping Operation from October 1993 to December 1994. I kindly request Sir to give us a little introduction about himself, and then I would like Khushi Singhal to pose Sir the questions that our team would like to ask before proceeding with the questions of our audience.
Should I start, Kushi?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Kushi. Firstly, I would like to extend my heartfelt felicitation to the Peace Club of Kirori Mal College, Ms. Ishika, the Vice President, Ms. Kushi, the General Secretary, and all the members who are involved in organizing this peace event that is on September 21st, which is celebrated as the World Peace Day. You already introduced me to the entire panel and the illustrious crowd. And I would like to thank Dr. Shweta Saxena, senior economist, for giving such a deep insight into the economic factors which are responsible for the growth pattern and the destruction pattern happening, due to which the peace is disturbed in some part of the world. Before we much proceed, I would like to share my experiences, what we have done in Somalia. That is a first-hand experience. Somalia is an African country that is called the Horn of Africa. And incidentally, when you look at Somalia map, you should also look at the what we call the junction point in Gujarat, the mouth that is there. It is a common link of Somalia jutting into the Gujarat. That means thousands of years back, the earth, when it was joined, Somalia was part of Gujarat. So culturally, many factors are there common between India and Somalia. Okay, so the peace in the world is nothing but a harmonious vibration. Normally, whenever we talk of peace, there is a synonymous word called stability. Peace has to, in concurrence, has to have stability. Whenever there is no peace, there is no stability. The music just now, what we heard some time back, is the harmonious motion of some vibrations of different instruments coming into the play. That is how we are feeling happy about it, and we get a lot of mental peace. Countries like Somalia or other African countries normally have seen infighting among themselves. A brief introduction to the Somali background. Right from 1980s, before that also, it was a very prosperous country with a running economy. They had a huge army, air force, and navy, and we had an excellent relationship with India also. There were common factors to it. And the Somali president used to visit India, and the Indian establishment used to visit Somalia. Now, I would like to share my presentation. I would start my first slide with the role of armed forces in peacekeeping. And I was commissioned into the 2nd Battalion Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry, which is a fighting force. Army is consisting of infantry, artillery, armored corps. There are fighting arms, and there is a service element part of it. I was part of the fighting arm, that is infantry. My first commissioning, after commissioning, my first posting was in Siachen Glacier for about 2 years. And I was on line of control and AGPL environment. After that, we moved to Pithoragarh. And from there, we moved to UN peacekeeping operations in Somalia. We were a brigade strength, roughly about 5,000 troops from India, consisting of aviation, armored, helicopters, infantry. We were taken to Somalia and we were given a particular area of responsibility. It was a multinational force. 29 countries have contributed their service personnel in order to bring peace and stability in Somalia. Somalia is primarily an Islamic country of 99.99% Sunni Muslims. And the education level is very, very low. And the mortality rate is very, very high. And the average expectancy of a male is about roughly 50 years. And in case if you look at the rural population, the 50% of the population is a drug addict. They have a local plant called khat. Day in, day out, they always consume that. And that is a drug, they take it. So I was part of that United Nations peacekeeping operations in Somalia. That was 2. This is my take, and Mahatma Gandhi has said, peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to cope with it. Complete peace and complete stability, in my view, is a utopian concept. When we are living in a normal world, it is like Dr. Shweta has just now said, whenever we talk about the growth, we need to look at the inflation also. A healthy inflation is roughly about 3 to 5%. Even in a normal environment, normal society, expecting that zero level crime is something which is not possible. There will be some element of crime. It is only that the crime rate increases beyond a particular level where we say that things are out of hand. Though it is not a welcome step. Even one event of crime is not acceptable. But when we landed in Somalia, it is a failed state. It is a complete failed state. There was no government, there was no army, there is no sense of any kind of order in the country. My experience with the peacekeeping operations there for roughly about 14 months, I brought in the following factors, the why there is a need for peacekeeping. If there is a conflict situation internally leading to chaos and destruction, like in Somalia, there is Muhammad Farah Aidid and Ali Muhammad. There were 2 army generals who got away with the government. They fought with each other for the power's sake, for the sake of power. They divided the army. Somalia is a country of tribals. It is a warlord system. Sayed Barre is a one warlord and Ali Muhammad is the second warlord. They were fighting on the street for domination. Somebody had tanks, somebody had heavy equipment. And the people who lost their life is the common people. Second is lack of central authority to bring any order. There was no government or police which can bring order in the state or in the streets of the Mogadishu, that is the capital, or any remotest part of the Somalia. People were left to themselves to fight for themselves, live for themselves, and die for themselves. That is when United States tried the level best to bring peace there, which it has failed. Then it has brought in United Nations role in Somalia as called United Nations Operation Somalia 2. That was in 1991. One additional factor which also brought in the economic disaster was lack of rains in that country for about 5 to 6 years continuously. This has brought drought. There was no agriculture, there was no food grains, and people were starving. That also brought increase in crime. People were fighting for a bottle of water. People were fighting for a morsel of grain. And you will be surprised if I share this thought with you. The people were ready to serve like slaves for food and water. That was the level of poverty there, and that's the level at which the hunger was there. Third was absence of any resolution. The 2 warlords who were fighting there, they tried through international interventions from Kenya or from Eritrea or from Ethiopia and other Arabian countries for any kind of resolution which did not come by. When I look back at the year 1990 and 1991, why world has turned away from African countries like Somalia and other areas, because you must look at the other events happening in Asia. That is the time when Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan, and it was a complete collapse of USSR or the Soviet Union. It had impact on the Somali background also. Next is the humanitarian crisis leading to large-scale displacement of people. With the increase in crime, increase in infighting between the two warlords, the common people, they started moving into Kenya or to Ethiopia and other countries, due to which there was a large-scale displacement of humanitarian crisis, and the United Nations Development Fund, World Food Program, they intervened and they established camps there, and they brought in international forces. And India happened to be the largest contributor of the armed forces for the United Nations peacekeeping operation. We were roughly about 5,500 people. Now, how do we maintain peace? The peace is required to be maintained, in my view, in a there were two methods to be adopted. First is the military activities. First is the moment you land up there, you are a superior force. That is, we were a superior force compared to what the local Somali warlords were, in terms of equipment, in terms of training, in terms of discipline. So whatever the area that was allocated to us, area of responsibility, we started dominating that area by our presence day in and day out, 24/7. We were on our foot, whether in the middle of the night or the daytime. The main aim is that it is our thought process, our orders to be followed by the local people, so that the peace can be brought back. Second is to lay ambushes. The warlords used to fight among themselves and they used to attack us also. So in order to bring down the capacity or the capability of these warlords, we used to lay ambush, that is ghat laga ke hamla, so that if there is any kind of threatening position, that can be destroyed. Third is the dominate by presence and firepower. The minimum strength that we used to go by is about 36 people. That is called the platoon strength, in about 6-7 vehicles. We have our own communication setup. We used to have our own firepower setup, which is far, far superior than the warlords. This is to ensure that the capability and the capacity of the warlords and the terrorists is not there to attack anybody, let alone us. Next is to disarm. We used to ensure that anybody found with a weapon, because there was no police, there is no army, that means anybody with a weapon is a person who is going to threaten us. We used to ensure, we used to disarm them, collect their weapons, either peacefully or using force. Next is carry out search and destroy operations to recover weapons and dangerous material. The Somali warlords used to operate in a very, very small level. They used to operate in a small villages. There is no electricity. So in the night operations we used to carry out, it used to be a very dangerous thing. It used to be a small shrub jungle. It is not a major jungle. Either there is a sea or there is a desert. That is the terrain that we were looking at. Next is to identify troublemakers and putting them into custody. Once we have disarmed the people, we used to identify the people who are likely to create trouble for us, who are going to attack us or disturb the peace in the area of responsibility. Next is to protect vulnerable sections. The vulnerable sections used to be women and children primarily, because the men folk used to carry weapons and fight among themselves. So this was the military activities by which we used to dominate their area by land and by air. Whenever we talk about the air, we used to use helicopters, helicopter gunships, to ensure that the area is dominated by air as well as by land. Then comes, once the Once we started dominating that area, once we have disarmed the people, once we have identified the people who are going to give trouble to us, we have taken them into custody. So we have isolated this entire section of people who are likely to give trouble to us. Then comes initiation of peace measures. First and foremost is to aid to civilians. That is, treat people with dignity. Before we went for Somali operation, we were given training on Somalia, what is the religious background, cultural background, what are their traditions that are important to them. Treat people with dignity and respect their culture and language. We could learn some few words of their language by which we could communicate with them, though we had interpreters provided by United Nations, but even then it is called Atmanirbhar. We used to ensure that we learn basic language, otherwise we used to do sign language. Second is provide basic necessities, that is food and water to all. As I've already said, there was no rains for about 4 to 5 years. There was a drought. There was no food production. So we used to provide food and water. Again, this is to be provided by World Food Program. Initially, we used to provide it to everyone en bloc. Next is to provide medical aid. There was no hospitals, functional hospitals there. Everything is destroyed. Next is create reconstruction activities. That is road, school, hospitals, that is involving international organizations like the World Food Program. Create activities which can keep all abled people well employed. Here I would like to share my experience. We used to collect all the men folk from the age of 15 to 60 as one category, and all women, again 15 to 60 as the second category, and the children. All men used to be involved in the road construction. All women were involved in the building construction, all the schools, hospitals, like this. And the children were taken to, we created a small school so that all the children are engaged. They were given bath, they were given breakfast like a cup of milk and few biscuits, and kept them engaged. And with the help of the World Food Program, we used to give salaries to them on a daily basis. Like their cereals, basic cereal was sorghum. We used to give 5 kgs of sorghum, 2 liters of oil, and 5 liters of water as the daily wages. This is to ensure that all the people are employed and their mind does not go towards any kind of criminal activity or their fighting ability. Next is initiate agriculture activities by giving aid to the farmers. When we went there in 1993, there was no rains. But in 1994, luck would have had it, there was heavy rains. So we thought it is better to initiate agriculture activities. We provided seeds, manure, and whatever they required. All these things were brought in from India, and we gave them to the farmers, and they were bumper farm in 1994. The main issue was they were the producers, they were the consumers. For the next couple of years, they were producing for themselves. It is only we were providing the basic necessities. Next is to create community groups. Once we engage them properly, we have given them food to eat, water to drink, medical help that has been provided, then is to create community groups. Somalia is a very complex society. There are Sunni warlords, different clans, they call it clans. And no two clans are supporting each other. So whenever we used to create community groups, it has to be homogeneous, not heterogeneous. If in case we mix up any two clan people, then they're going to be fighting with each other rather than doing any community system. Then we re-established their police system. We recollected all their police people, trained them, and we started giving them salaries and ensuring local protection is given. We provided them weapons also. We provided with training also. They were part of our group. So wherever we were going, they used to be part of our group, ensuring local security because they know the language. We had the interpreter. The last and most important thing was bringing warring groups on discussion table. Once the military activity has been taken, the crime rate has been brought down, We have established our writ there. Our presence has been accepted there. And then we carried out the aid to the civil authorities. Then we carried out what we call the activities of winning the hearts and minds of the people. So I would like to share a couple of photographs, which will be speaking 1,000 words for each of the photograph. This is the one of the photograph I'm showing you. This is the reality of Somalia with a complete destruction in the village where we were posted. If you can see, there is no, all the huts were destroyed. We used local women between the age of 15 to 60 to reconstruct these villages' houses, their own houses, not ours, their own houses. The men were used to construct the road where the children are standing. We constructed a 12-kilometer road in 60 days. So at least for 60 days, the men folk were busy. They were not using weapons. They were under direct control of our visibility. The moment we landed in Somalia, our primary job is to dominate that entire area so that they accept our presence there. This is the first day of our arrival into Somalia, where we have taken, these are two interpreters that we have, and this is myself and a senior officer next to me, and we had about one platoon of people, that is 36 people, covering about 10 square kilometers area. This is, we used to, on a daily basis, we used to position ourselves in our area of responsibility in a very critical manner so that we dominate the entire area. This is the national highway, which we are covering on a daily basis. I used to drive about 150 kilometers a day just to ensure that entire stretch is crime-free and ensure that no Somali warlords are there on the either side of the road. As I said, it is a multinational force. This is the American forces who are part of us. We had 29 countries' armies who are part of the multinational force, and ours being the largest, about 5,500 troops. This is the national highway where we were demining the road. There's a landmine which we have detected, and we are removing that landmine to ensure that the safety of the road is there. This is the nerve center for the entire north-south movement of the Somalia. So this is roughly about 175-kilometer road stretch, which we are keeping it safe. This is to ensure environment is safe. Then once the environment is safe, how do we carry out the aid to the people? We carry out aid to the people by land, by air. The areas which were approachable by land, we used to go ourselves and give it by road. We used to provide convoy protection to the World Food Program trucks. They had sorghum, they had wheat, they had drinking water, they had oil. And this was the UN helicopter which I was giving protection to, where we were taking aid to the civilian authorities. This is the elixir of life. Somalia is a dry country with either sand or the desert or an ocean on the other side, Arabian Sea and Red Sea. So water was a big problem with no rains, but we have taken geologists with us who have identified water sources with a high water table. So we have taken drilling machines to Somalia, where we have dug bores about 100 feet or 50 feet, we got water. We used to supply water to the entire region from our tankers. Then this is the community building and road construction. It is not that we were there as a dominant force. We were dominating by our presence and fire, but we used to take the viewpoints of the community. What is their requirement? We used to do activities of reconstruction based on their need, not what we were thinking. So we used to take community leaders, especially their elders. Wherever we talk about tribals, the tribal elders, clan elders, used to be taken into confidence, and the local population used to also be taken into confidence. This is my village called Guf Gadud, where we were talking to the people what exactly they require. They required school, they required a road, they required a hospital. So we were taking their views before we did the reconstruction. And these are the my senior officers and the community leaders in that area. What we call is the sarpanch in our local term. There we call it as the clan leader, elder. We used to take their views before, and there's a one gentleman here in the shorts. He's a Zimbabwean army, so we were replacing them. This is the medical doctor who I took along with me to a remote village, and we organized a medical camp. We used to think very holistic in wherever we used to go, providing the aid to the civil authorities. We used to carry a lot of drinking water. The old water bottles we used to keep. We used to fill up water. We used to carry a lot of biscuits, chocolates, and we used to carry a medical element, some basic provisions of medicines, and one doctor and one nursing assistant. So whenever we are going out on our patrolling, even if there is some people who are sick or injured, we used to provide a medical treatment there and then. This is how we have carried out winning the hearts and minds of people. And we used to take special provision and special care about the children, because the first victim of war is the innocence. It is the children whose innocence is lost. They don't know what to do. They have entire time for themselves, whole day and night. They have nothing to go, nowhere to go, no school. So empty mind, devil's workshop. They used to be involving themselves in theft and crimes. Then when people don't have money, their wealth is their animals. People there have elephants, they have goats. These are the primary things. Or they have donkeys. That is their wealth. And we used to provide water to these animals as well as to the civilians. It was the biggest aid to civil authorities that brought in the entire crime rate to zero, practically zero. In our area of responsibility, when we organized school, we could collect children from 10 different villages spread across roughly about 40-50 kilometers area. And there was no crime, there was no firing, there was no terrorist attack in that area. This is the wealth of the local people, the goats, what we used to provide. We used to provide dry grass also, because there was no grass or food there. We used to provide dry grass and water to the animals. And the men folk used to be involved in the projects. This is empathy and caring. We used to take special care in meeting the children on the street. Once we landed there in the 1993, for the first 6 months, we had tough time because people were not accepting us. And we used to go and move around with our weapons, heavy weapons. But after 6 months, we used to go around in the local village without any weapons. You could see that I was standing with no weapons. And you see a Somali policeman with AK-47. And we used to be very friendly with the children. This is empathy and caring that brought in their parents towards our side. So information is important to us. Involving them in any kind of reconstruction activity was very easy after a couple of months, because we were giving them food, shelter, water, and we were creating shelter for themselves. And we used to provide all these things under the project of World Food Program. And this is my friend Mohammed, and we were having what we call the diplomatic relationship getting developed here at our age level. And the thing I would like to share with everyone is the importance of Hindi movies and Hindi songs. When we went to Somalia, that was the time when DDLG and Bazigar movies came. Their songs were pretty famous. So there was no video or anything with us. So I used to carry a lot of Hindi sets. And whenever we moving in a convoy, we used to play this music just to keep the people happy. And people used to ask for these audio cassettes. They used to say that give this cassette, we will allow you to go. So this is a way to buy peace. So as I said, international diplomacy is not necessary that it has to be done at a one level only. We can do it at much, much different levels. Hindi music is a soft power that was there. We have utilized them, and we have utilized the soft power of dealing with the kids there. And that is a touch point. Whenever we used to deal with the kids, their parents used to be on our side. And we used to ensure that way that there is no crime. It became so easy for them to surrender their weapons. So angels are not always in whites. They do come in different colors. That is the blue helmets. Are called, peacekeepers are called blue helmets. Peace is a vibration in harmonic method. Violence is a cacophony. Who else knows the price of peace than a person who is trained to be in the war? The price of peace has to be paid in the currency of blood. If you want sustainable peace, you need to have dominant force on the ground who can ensure that environment for peace is maintained. Economic cycle will only start once there is peace and stability. Dr. Shweta, if you allow me to give my viewpoint, Paul Studentsky in his Income of Wealth book has mentioned armed forces as a regrettable necessity. And it is nice to hear that it's also called the opportunity cost. I really thank all of you for listening to me, giving an opportunity to speak about the peacekeeping operations and my experiences in Somalia. And we did extend our operations in the Rwanda also. If most of you were not born also, you must go and Google what is Rwanda. And it was a horrendous thing. And I served there also. So as Dr. Shweta has rightly said, all of us are really lucky to be in this country. If you want to know what you're missing in this country, go and spend few days in Somalia or some an African country. You will realize that what is the level of freedom we have, the level of secularism we have, level of peace we have. The people with complaints should go to Somalia. Whenever there is a problem of lack of peace, the space is occupied by violence. The space is occupied by Islamic terrorism. Now in Somalia, there is a dominant group called Al-Shabaab, which is one of the offshoots of ISIS, and they're supported by Al-Qaeda also. So stability and peace is something like a small kid or the tree of small growth. We have to protect with both the hands and ensure that it is nurtured properly. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and opportunity that you're given to me. Good day to all of you.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking us through the different slides of your life journey and idea of peace in such an ill manner. We were really touched by our words and the inventory of questions, but I guess most of you have already answered. So after that, we can open the forum for audience to ask questions to you. So we have first question to you, Captain. We would be really elated if you could comment on India's contribution to the United Nations Peacekeeping Organization and the ways the country can be part of such global peace negotiations.
Sure. India is one of the largest contributor to the peacekeeping operations in United Nations. If you happen to see and Google it, we have started right from the first operations that was there in Korean Peninsula. We started our peacekeeping operations in Korean Peninsula. Then we went on to Lebanon. Even today, there is a peacekeeping detachment in Lebanon. Then we have in Congo. Then we have in Sudan. Then we had in Somalia, which came out. So India is one of the largest, what you call peacekeepers of the world. And honestly telling you, they're in demand. Unlike some of the Western countries which dominate in terms of by weapon, I've seen many Western countries dominating there. I would advise all of you to see a movie called Black Hawk Down whenever you get an opportunity. And I'm the eyewitness to it, on which day we've seen about 76 American Army dead bodies. And I was witness to that operation. Whereas we deal with hearts and minds. It's not that we don't know how to operate our weapons. We do carry our weapons, but with a heart in our chest. First is to do the humanitarian activities. We are one of the largest contributors of the peacekeeping even till today.
Actually, Captain Vijay, can I just say something? What you said is absolutely right, basically.
Yes, ma'am.
No, I mean, like when we talk about peace, I mean, like, peace has so many dimensions actually, and keeping peace is fragile. Peace is fragile. To maintain it, and people really do not understand. I think the only people who understand the value of peace is basically who serve in the armed forces, because they're defending that. They're defending your freedoms, they're defending your independence. And then when I see people against the armed forces, that really breaks my heart. I mean, like, people who are really trying to kind of protect you, people, a lot of the citizens go against them. So peace is fragile and it needs to be maintained. And it's not an easy thing. It is easy, but not easy. If you just understand the basic thing that peace starts from you, I mean, like individual person, it can be built. It has a domino effect, in my opinion.
Yes,
you
Dr.
find peace within yourself, you'll find peace anywhere and everywhere, and you live in harmony with everybody. So that's my belief. I really do believe in that. So thank you for actually saying that.
I share your thoughts with you, Dr. Shweta. As you rightly said, who knows best about peace than a person who has been trained to be in the war and the destruction? I have not shown many photographs who are part of the destruction because it doesn't make sense. One representation is good enough to know. And I've seen death very closely. I've seen death very, very closely, and I've seen destruction too close. And honestly telling you, Dr. Shweta, I second your opinion that all of us are lucky to be in India.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for your remarks. Now, without delaying further, we can open the forum for the questions from the audience. I think some of the questions are there in the chat box. So, Tanisha Sangwan asks, her question is to Captain Vijay. So my question is, what's your perspective on using violence for building peace, like keeping peace in a country like Somalia, but have been very difficult and must have involved using some kind of violence?
Though maintaining peace requires a certain element of strength. Only people with strength can maintain the peace or bring in the peace. Wherever, in whichever the part of the world, whenever there is a conflict, it's always diplomacy is the first level of attempt that is made. When diplomacy and armed forces are the two sides of the same coin, we achieve the same objective. A diplomat will achieve with a soft-spoken and give and take business and everything. Whereas by the moment we are involved in that, we try to bring in the situation by use of force. It is not necessary that everything has to be done by force. Wherever it is possible, we can bring by diplomacy, that should be used. Use of force should be the ultimate and the last weapon, not as the first weapon. And minimum force, maximum result.
Actually, couldn't agree more with you, Captain Vijay. It's like you dip into a little bit of your Vedic wisdom. Actually, it shows. Remember the battle of Mahabharata happened, right? Before they went to war, Krishna went with a sandhi, prastav. Basically, he went with a proposal for peace. Since it wasn't accepted on the other side, war was inevitable, right? Actually, so yeah, diplomacy, you try your level best to actually achieve peace without having to go to war. War is always the last resort, but
even when we get involved in that activity, we also try our level best not to use the force in the first per se. We also try to create an environment whereby we discuss, we create conditions of conduciveness. Wherever the armed forces are involved in peace building, please remember one thing: we are not We are only there to give the environment. Once the environment has been provided, it is the political setup and the diplomatic setup which has to take it up forward. You can't have continuous presence of armed forces on the ground. It is going to be counterproductive.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we welcome the audience to unmute their mic and ask the question if they have one.
So, hello, sir. Remy this side. So, right now, what you said that the force is the counterproductive action, and that we should resort first to the, we should not directly go to the option of force or not opt directly it. But the irony of present day is that at times for resorting peace, we have to take the option of you have to opt for force. This irony you may see applying or implications of it in very many corners of this world. So, what is your take on this irony? Applying force or using force for resorting peace in the country?
Well, it all depends upon the power and the authority. Who is what is their thought process? If you ask me, when I'm in the uniform or wearing this cap, this is called the veteran's cap. We always tell them one thing, that first utilize your own services, your own ability. In case you can do it with your own resources, like in the country, what do you have first? You have the local police, then you have the state reserve police, then you have the central armed police, that is CRPF, BSF. And if everything fails, then comes the last resort, is called the army. And before army, all other organizations are police services. The amount of the force that they use is minimal. You don't find army personnel moving around with the sticks. They don't do lathi charge. They don't fire in the air. In case we have been asked to take control of a situation and we have been asked to fire on a particular unruly crowd, we fire for effect. We fire for effect. But that too minimal. It is not trigger happy situation. The role of armed forces in any kind of peace building is the last step, not the first step. When you've failed all your resources, your diplomacy, your politics, your state level forces and everything, then comes armed forces. Even when the armed forces are involved in that, we ensure that the community building and community leaders are involved in peace building. Because we go with weapon in one hand and the dove in the other hand. They know very well that in case we don't fall to our way of doing things in terms of establishing peace, we have better ways of doing it. Whereas you go to political setup or something, they need another resource called army. So we apply, wherever we go, it is the hearts and minds. It is not only that, we segregate the people who are creating trouble from the people who are not giving the trouble. People who are giving trouble are always in minuscule level. It is only the fear element. They create an environment of fear by which the majority of people don't come in forward. We segregate that population. That's what in the first slide I mentioned. We disarm people. We segregate people who are trouble creators, take them into custody or put them into the local police custody. We use force wherever there is essential to be used as a last weapon, not as a first weapon.
Thank you, sir, for answering the question.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Sir, recently we saw Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. So somehow it was motivated by...
Vaibhav, you are not audible.
Hello, am I audible?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay. You can drop your question in the chat box. So in case anybody else has a question, they can ask.
There's a question in the chat box, Kuchi.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is for Captain Vijay. So Mr. Vijay, as you told that destruction of USSR in 1991 affected the violence of Somalia, But geographically, Somalia is very far from USSR. So how destruction of USSR affected the violence in Somalia?
Okay. You must look at these strategic affairs. Russia, there was a Cold War going on between USSR and USA. When 1979, when the USSR moved into Afghanistan, the USA moved into Pakistan and created that Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, all these people were created, what we call the Mujahideen. And in 1990, when USSR moved back, it got under the Mikhail Gorbachev, the USSR fragmented and it became unipolar world. Why people were interested in Somalia in first place, as Dr. Shweta has rightly said. You look at that country. Mogadishu is the capital with the Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea there. There is uranium in the sands of Mogadishu. And the American hovercrafts used to come. Hovercraft is a type of aircraft which can go on water as well as land. They used to take tons and tons of Mogadishu sand and put them into the American ships and take it to USA. What else was there in Somalia? It was the uranium, for which they were fighting. They tried for about 6-7 years under the UNISOM 1 operation, which they did not do. And the collapse of Soviet Union also reduced the interest in Somalia. Somalia has got the Gulf of Aden going towards Red Sea. It is sandwiched, this Red Sea, this Arabian Peninsula is covered because of that. So it is a shipping lane. Today, there is a, what you call, if at all there is some kind of things happening in the waters there, what you call pirates, that is happening only in Somalia, nowhere else.
Yeah.
Okay, that is the Gulf of Aden. Every third day, there is a hijacking of a ship. So unipolar world, where the moment US lost interest in Afghanistan, it lost interest in Somalia also. So that's there, they withdrew from that country.
And it's quite interesting, Captain, which actually, I mean, like, from what I think of, you know, the moment Soviet Union left Afghanistan at that time, US lost all interest in these mujahideens that they had created also. And that's part, if you actually look at the timeline, that was exactly the time when all these guys had so much energy in them, right, to destroy. Our conflict in Kashmir started to actually pick up pace.
In fact, you know, I would share, if you allow me for a minute or so, why problem in Kashmir started in '89. You're an economist of IMF, you would know the economic factors. Around that time, the economic situation of India was at the lowest. Whether it is in terms of foreign currency or whether it's a balance of trade, a balance of payment, economic growth, all economic indicators were at the lowest. And there was a coalition government in central government, which was at the weakest link. And the exact situation is replicated today in Pakistan. And if you happen to see that particular period, the Soviet Union coming back from Afghanistan has changed the polarity of the world from a two superpower nations to single superpower nation.
Thank you so much, sir. I guess this answers the question. So we have another question from Weber. Sir, we saw Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. It was a compulsion for US to end violence towards its personnel, but it came at a cost of freedoms that were being enjoyed by the society there. As Dr. Saxena mentioned, that finding inner peace can help in achieving world peace. However, in case of varying ideas of peace, how do you reconcile differences? How do you choose between versions of peace?
There is no different versions of peace. There is only one peace. In whichever angle you see, peace is a peace. Okay. And it is like, you know, what is the difference between Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban and everybody? There is no difference. Everybody kills in an inhuman way, and they kill innocent people. Taliban, if somebody says that Taliban is a lesser evil than Al-Qaeda or ISIS, are they killing Are they killing lesser number of people? They are killing equal number of people. They're harming the what you call the humanitarian crisis there in Afghanistan. The way they were treating the women and children, we have seen it with our own eyes. ISIS or Al-Shabaab, all these things are same wine in different bottles. And the color of peace is only one, that is white.
Sometimes it has to go through the red, but it still ends up being white anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's the reason, you know, the price of peace is through red.
Yeah. But actually, can I just add one thing that you were saying about the economic condition? And I mean, like all these things are linked, as I said, you know, economic conditions lead to conflicts, conflicts lead to bad economic situations, right? Actually, they all are quite intertwined. And what you were saying, yeah, at the end of the 80s, the situation in India, economic situation wasn't too good, but the whole thing culminated literally into the financial crisis, the currency crisis that we had in 1991. And part of the reason was also that was the time when we seriously didn't even have money to pay, like, you know, our debtors back. I mean, like even buy even 1 week worth of imports, I think at the time in 1991 when we actually hit the crisis. I have that was something I did for my dissertation in my PhD also. But interestingly enough, at the same time, lots of shocks came together, and one was the Gulf War. So think about it, Gulf War, when it happened in 1991, basically it meant that all our Indians needed to be repatriated home, which means loss of foreign exchange, remittances, and having actually to rehabilitate all those Indians. So that was another reason for actually, like, that was sort of a trigger also for the the currency crisis that we had in 1991 when we went to the IMF for a loan, and after that all the liberalization that took place.
Correct,
so,
correct,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the years between 1989 to 1991, 92 were, I would say, that economic crisis part 2 after 1973.
Thank you, Captain Vijay, for your deep insights into war, into the life of an army officer, and into the essential aspects of peace building in war-torn nations like Somalia. As Indians, we are proud of your work in the army, and as humans, we deeply acknowledge your efforts in building peace in our world. I would also like to thank Shweta ma'am for her input in this question answer round. Now I will invite President of our club, Yash Sheila, to end this event with a formal vote of thanks to our guest and audience.
And so with this, we come to an end of today's session. I, Yash, as a president of Peace Club Kirori Mal College, would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Sweta Chaman Saxena for taking out time from her busy schedule and enlightening us. The session gave us deep insights into how economy is influencing peace building process. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. It was an honor to have you here. And I want to thank Captain A. Vijay Srinivas. Today, we had the opportunity to hear your thoughts on how military and its role in peace building. So, and also, I would like to thank our principal, Dr. Vijay Chaman, for facilitating the event. Unfortunately, she is not there as of now. And then I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Dr. Vandana Chaudhary, Dr. Rupak Datta Gupta, and Dr. Mujib Ahmed Khan, our staff advisors, for encouraging us to organize this event. And I would like to thank other faculty members and finally the audience for really being with us. Thank you. May I now request everyone to please turn on their cameras so that we can have a screenshot. Actually, have you taken the screenshot?
It's done.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.